Hi listeners, thanks again for joining for another episode in my Ellevate series with your host, me, Becky. In this podcast, we talk about all things women empowerment, challenges in the recruitment industry, career progression, and anything else that is empowering women in business. Thanks for listening, and please remember to follow and subscribe for all updates. Hey Nikita, thank you so much for joining me today. Very excited about today's episode. We have Nikita joining us. Nikita and I met a few months back at an event in Berlin. Nikita was on a panel and discussed points around gendered feedback, which we'll go into more today. This event was with a company called TaxFix, and we hosted it in their Berlin-based office. So yeah, just to give an introduction on Nikita, she is an engineering leader who started her career in the US, worked in Dublin, and is now in the heart of Germany's tech scene in Berlin. She's helped scale multiple tech divisions across large corporates as well as startups. Originally from Nepal, then moving to India, and then kicking off her career in the US. Nikita is here to share with us today lots about her experiences when it comes to fighting for fair, ungendered feedback. So yeah, Nikita, thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to today's episode. So let's get into it. So the first question, I guess it would be good to go through is, what is feedback and why is it important?
Yeah, so feedback in itself, it could be just advice that you've gotten from someone around you. Feedback is a way to create boundaries when you feel like someone else around you, you want to share something with them. Why is it important? I think, when I talk to most people, my team, myself, just looking back in my career, I feel like I can think of pivotal moments that have changed my career trajectories, and they all kind of boil down to feedback given to me by my peers, my manager, and not all has been good, let's just say. I think sometimes when you get a good piece of feedback, that can really help you learn about yourself, but sometimes it can also stunt your growth or really stop your career in its track, or you can go down a very specific sort of path based on the feedback you receive. So I think it's really key when it comes to people's careers and their paths at work. And we should spend more time thinking and talking about it.
Absolutely. I suppose just in terms of the context of that feedback, I presume there are appropriate times to be given feedback.
Yeah, I think, most companies that I've worked at have a sort of periodic feedback cycles where it's a very, manager gives feedback to reports. Sometimes there are 360 feedbacks where you get, where you can solicit feedback from your peers. But I feel, for me personally, feedback is best given when something specific has happened and in a timely sort of manner, because you can often tap into a part of someone's brain because they know exactly what the context of that feedback is, exactly how they might have behaved and how they could perhaps change their feedback or continue doing what they're doing. So yeah, I think timely feedback given often for me is better than once in 6 months, like a whole lot of feedback.
Okay, great. So to go into a bit more detail then on gendered feedback. So how do we interpret gendered feedback? How does it look in the workplace in this day and age?
I think all of us, we're human, we're shaped by society, we're shaped by what we've learned through history and millennia of sort of socialization, and our brains shortcut and create stereotypes for different types of humans. And let's take gender here, right? I think gendered feedback is when, again, we as humans take this years and years of socialization and make shortcuts, and someone doesn't fit sort of their box in our brains. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that feedback often can fall into these traps where you frame it based on your frame of reference of society.
Okay, and have you noticed any differences between the feedback that is sometimes given to either men or women when it comes to, like, it could come down to things like how to be more assertive in leadership? What kind of confidence levels do you have? How do you visualize things like that?
So going back to sort of, perception of different genders, and these are very binary terms, but if we start to talk about traits associated with either gender, you can boil it down to sort of agentic traits and communal traits. Agentic traits often being associated, with positions of power, like doctor, like lawyer. So traits like being assertive and independent and powerful, whereas communal traits are often, benefiting others and caring, empathetic, often associated with historically female or women-led professions like a nurse or a teacher. So I think based on sort of these shortcuts that our brain makes, the differences in, what women and men are encouraged to do when it comes to different types of axes. For example, let's take confidence, right? Like women are often told to be more confident, which is like so inherent. It's like, hey, this is a personality flaw you have. Like you need to, be just like become more assertive or confident. Whereas men are often encouraged to display more confidence, where, it's framed as like fixable. I think there are these little like kind of differences when it comes to the types of work you get assigned, the type of words used for your feedback. And there's a ton of research out there on this, and I'm happy to go into more detail.
Great. And how about the language used? I presume that's also a big one, right? When it comes to giving feedback, like it could be interpreted as biased, right? Based on some of the, whether it be adjectives or even the verbs that are used. I presume that plays a role in that.
Absolutely. I think language is so gendered and biased. For example, there was a body of research that reviewed a ton of reviews, and women's reviews had 2.4 times as many references to team accomplishments. So the credit was given to, the team, like, hey, you were part of this team that did so good, or like, you were part of this group that delivered that. Whereas men's references were often individual accomplishments. So, like, hey, you led this team, or that, you drove this initiative. And that's, going back again to the agentic communal thing. That's just one very simple example of wording and language used. Then I think another thing that comes up often is that, especially in, the tech world, women's reviews had half as many references to like technical experiences and technical expertise. They were often given feedback just on their communication style and less on like the hard skills, so to speak. So yeah, I do think that language plays a huge role when it comes to feedback.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that kind of leads into the next question around, we kind of covered a little bit of already, but what are some documented phenomenons when it comes to biased feedback? I'm not sure if there are specific ones to kind of go through. I think there's quite a lot, but yeah, if we want to cover some of those.
I'll talk about some research done around, there are 4 very well-documented biases, but I'll start with the first one, which I think most women that I've spoken to have experienced, which is, it's called the double bind or the tightrope bias, or it's a very contrary sort of feedback, which is that women are often told to be more authoritative, more confident, more decisive. But if you tip too far on one side, then you're too bossy, or that you're too frigid or cold. So there's this like really, really hard balancing act of being approachable but also maintaining distance. It's an impossible task, to be honest. So that's one very, very well experienced and sad one. Another that comes up often is called the prove it again bias, where men are often given opportunities based on their potential to be good at something, whereas women often fall into the trap of she's not ready yet, or like, oh, I just want to see you do this like one more time. And that, I don't know why that happens, but it's probably, yeah, I'm going to blame it on society.
When it comes to this prove it again feedback, I guess that has a direct impact on confidence, right? Which has, kind of, it can become a vicious cycle. It's like, okay, well, then is it a self-fulfilling prophecy? Do I need to, do that extra assignment again? Do I need to hit that certain revenue target? Do I need to roll that project out just one more time, or, in a better way next time, or whatever the task is at hand? And it comes down to things like we often hear, right? Like women will look at a job description and not apply for that role unless they can tick every single box. Whereas it's oftentimes if men maybe see it, one or two boxes ticked, sure, I got this, I'll back myself. And like that kind of almost plays a role when it comes to feedback as well. Have you ever noticed that internally or on a personal level?
Yes, so much. The job description one is a really great example. I'm really, really glad that so many people are talking about that one, right? But I think we self-select, right? Like, it's like, okay, yes, prove it again bias, that is a systemic thing, but it starts so early. Like, it starts probably when you're in high school or even before at home, right? I think then you start to self-select and you're not good enough, or the confidence gap, as you mentioned, I think that becomes even more pronounced. And I have felt it, especially in like, my mid-career, let's just say. I have gunned and like gone for several promotions and career level changes, etc. And I do recall, really being grinded down by not having been given this opportunity to whatever it is, a new title or a raise. It's like, you just need to be more consistent with this. And yes, I understand that sometimes that is what is needed, but again, there is this thing that I've noticed that happens, especially when you're not in the room. And I, as a manager, when I'm in these conversations around like calibrations, it's very interesting to spot when people start, say like, they got lucky, or like, they're not experienced enough. There's these like words, it's really vague, and it impacts, all genders to some degree. I think it's related, like it's also attached to a personality type. If you're not doing visible work, if you're sort of a person that's more introverted, I think this can impact you.
Absolutely. No, I think those are all really good points. And I was going to ask around, from your personal experience, whether that be your time in Berlin or, maybe some of your earlier stages in your career, have you had anyone positively impact you during those times when maybe you weren't so confident, or, the feedback was kind of vague, but, you had to kind of dig deep for that, to go have those difficult conversations? Anyone that, you don't have to say specific names if you don't want to, but anyone that springs to mind? And if so, what kind of got you over that?
Yeah. So I'll share a positive example, because, going back to what I started with, thinking back at my career, some of the most pivotal experiences have been related and tied to feedback I've received and managers I've had, maybe or like peers. But I started my career as an engineer, and the engineering manager role seemed so far away from me. Like I was like, there's no way that I could lead a team. And I do recall my manager at the time, and now my really good friend, he sort of just he just pushed me to like apply, and I was trying to self-select out, of course, as we do. And yeah, he said, you know what, just apply, worst case you won't get the job, right? And I did get the job, and I felt like this was the profession that was made for me, and like he saw it before I did. So I think, there's the prove it again bias that exists and is documented. And really, sometimes what it takes to get out of that is just to take a chance on someone, to like push them, to advocate for them. As I'm sure he did, he was, you know, I'm sure he was heavily influential in the decision. But yeah, this comes back to like sponsorship, and this is something I try to take forward in my career now. Sponsoring people, giving other people stretch projects to like push themselves out of their comfort zones. I think maybe like not so positive feedback that kind of got me thinking about feedback all, so much is just, I think, less about maybe prove it again bias, but more about this be more confident. Like that happened really early in my career, and that was detrimental to my career growth, to be honest, because I was so fixated on like me not being confident that I think I stopped trying to get better at like my technical craft, and only focus on like my meeting personality, and I still struggle with that. So yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I think that's, as we said before, it's not just unique to women, right? That be more confident, be more assertive. I know, it's common feedback. And going back to your point around give specific feedback, it's like, well, how can I be more assertive? What does that actually mean? So when you were going through your time around receiving that feedback, did you figure out anything that you realized, aha, that's the magic trick to being more assertive? Now I'm assertive. Or did it come over time? Did it come with just, gained experience and kind of gaining confidence through experience? Or was there an aha moment when you were like, okay, I just need to say more things like this, and now I'm assertive?
Yeah, definitely. Not. I did have aha moments. I have had several now, but not as a little bit as an individual, like trying to get better at my own thing, but more as a manager trying to give this kind of feedback to others. Because I understand where the feedback came from, right? I've certainly felt like I wanted to share that feedback just as is. Whereas, for the quiet folks, let's just say, in meetings, etc., I often just try to dig in deeper, right? Like, what makes someone confident in a meeting setting? If my manager back in the day had given me some advice, not on like, hey, be more confident, but like, hey, I noticed that you were in this meeting room, we were talking about these really hard concepts on, I don't know, like distributed systems. I get that you didn't have enough experience and knowledge to feel confident in that conversation. Why don't you take some time, take this education budget, go study these courses? These are some really interesting books where you can gain that confidence or like learn about this topic. And I think that would have helped me so much more, because I would have channeled my energy into this really specific task at hand that probably would have built my confidence in a very, organic sort of way. Because when you feel like you know something, enough to talk about or challenge someone in a meeting, then the confidence comes on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, I like that advice a lot. I think especially if you are a master at your craft, as you say, if you know that that's how that person may or may not respond to advice, then great opportunity to say, okay, well, research up on this. I know you're an expert in this space. Next time at the, next meeting, I'd like to hear about this from you because you're really talented in that particular field. And it's less around saying like, speak up, be more confident. It's more like, can you cover these topics in the next?
Yeah, absolutely. And this goes back to the documented feedback pattern, that is, there's just not enough technical feedback, feedback about the craft. It's so much about like personality traits and how we communicate, and and I think that disconnect just really, it harms us.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and moving on to the next question then, and it's ties in nicely when I think this is a type of feedback that people often get, right? Is, oh, so-and-so is not strategic enough. How can we make women maybe help themselves or combat this feedback? Are there any kind of, questions or exercises that they could go through to, consider those points?
Yeah. This is something that I am seeing, impact sort of mid-level career women a lot. And I saw this really great blog post about it, which, we can link after, but it was like SNS, she's not strategic, but is she? So I think there is some element of, women often get pushed into like really executing roles because sure, maybe we're good at multitasking and organizational tasks and frankly, getting things done, right? But that doesn't mean that women are not able to also take a step back and have vision and be strategic. And often when you kind of start to think like, hey, is someone strategic or not? I like the framing that, ask yourself or, share about yourself. Like, hey, have I been able to recruit and retain a high-performing team? Have I brought new ideas to the table, that have impacted the business positively? Do I understand all the functions in the business? Do I have sort of like organizational awareness? All of these things require strategic mindsets. And, you can be both an executor and a strategist. And I think we need to both stop self-selecting into very like execution based roles, but also stop saying that this person is not strategic, where maybe the facts are that in fact they are strategic.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that. We'll definitely link up the post that you mentioned. I'm sure people would like to take a read of that. So moving into the next question, when it comes to challenges for women in terms of the balancing act, should we actually be able to do it all? What are your thoughts on that?
This is really interesting. And I really struggle with this, right? Because what does doing it all mean, really? And I think there's this like kind of like brand of feminism that I don't fully relate with, which is that like, oh, me as an individual, I have control over my own sort of like path. Like, oh, if I am not getting a certain like outcome, or like I haven't gotten that promotion, this is based on like my shortfall, my shortcomings, or like things that I'm not good at. And it gives women this like illusion of control, which is that, hey, I should be able to have it all. I should be able to push myself and like do everything. I have a happy home, have a, really balanced diet, and like cook 8 times a day. I don't know. And at the same time, like get that promotion, be a high performing, individual. Whereas frankly, we cannot individually fight the system, right? There's a whole system that benefits from, the status quo, and that will not change based on like what I can do about myself, right? And yeah, sure, maybe there's this perception that like, okay, I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to, embody all of these sort of like traits that I see in the leader, kind of going off in like lean in sort of brand, and change my fate. Whereas that harms other women, right? We are not changing the system. We are not making just the organization a better place for women. So I think the can women have it all? Like, yeah, it's a lot to ask, right? Like, can we just have like one thing or two things, and that's okay. And yeah, I personally I'm trying really hard to like take off the pressure for myself and tell myself that it's okay. I'm not going to fail the whole demographic that is like women,
Totally. And I think it's really difficult. It's quite a difficult answer, right? Because it is very personal. When it comes to goals, like everyone has a slightly different trajectory that they see themselves on. For some, it might be, more career focused. For some, it might be more well-rounded. It might be more family oriented. It might be more, work-life balance. It might be things like personal hobbies. So yeah, as you say, it's very difficult to work under the illusion that you can do it all. And it's probably fair that women are supporting each other and just saying like, hey, as you say, just pick one or two. You can't do it all. And you're not a failure if you don't. But I think,
yes,
it can be difficult to look at what might be deemed as high achieving women who from the outside, it looks like, okay, well, they seem to be ticking every box. How are they balancing that all? And I think sometimes, not always, but if you dig beneath the surface, it's not always like so perfect, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of brings us to like this point of, how important I have found community, like the community of women in tech or in the workforce. I think we need to have more conversations like this with our community. We need to have people that you can kind of look up to as mentors, mentor others even, and yeah, I think you slowly start to realize that people are in very similar situations to you, and also we're not going to change this whole like all of the barriers that exist alone. We just cannot do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So kind of moving towards the last questions then, in terms of those barriers, when it comes to either organizational or cultural barriers for women, have you noticed anything different from your experience working in, various different cultures, different regions, different types of businesses, obviously where you studied as well, when it comes to the biases around women and, what those biases in terms of how they can lead to potential barriers? What have you noticed there?
Yeah, I think it is very it kind of goes back to each person's socialization, and that varies widely culturally and across countries. I have been lucky enough to work in several countries and with people of all sort of backgrounds, and I think mostly I will say it's been really like uplifting and positive, right? I think at least in tech, we're lucky enough that diversity gets celebrated and we talk about inclusion. There are definitely several moments of like microaggressions that we've all, I can guarantee, experienced. And it can be for like just something that seems mundane, like language. Like I do remember, working with someone who spoke like a Latin language, and they would call every single piece of code like masculine pronouns, and it used to bum me out so much. I'm like, why is this piece of code like male, right? Like I think we've all experienced like the automatic he for manager, or these like small things, and it really like wears you down. I think the whole conversation around inclusive language has only gotten bigger and better, but I sometimes have to self-correct as well, right? From just translation as well as learned experiences. So I think there are many small and big things across countries, and I don't know. I'm not sure how my lived experiences impact me as so many different. I live on so many different intersections as a human. A person of color, a queer person, a woman. I don't know. Am I disadvantaged? I'm not sure.
It's all about your experience, right? And I think it's interesting to hear because everyone kind of lives totally different experiences. I think you're right around the language context. That happens all the time. I think there is an element of, I mean, obviously your experience tells true, right? You're probably working quite an international team where presumably sometimes English is the common language. So sometimes it's not even intentional. It's just genuinely like a lack of skill or expertise in the language. But it's just interesting how those things do kind of come about. And you're right on like some of the small biases. I mean, I'm sure most women have been the only woman in the room, and if there's a meeting, they might be asked to take the notes or things like that. And it's and as you say, that could just be like something small, something annoying, but it's kind of the buildup of that where it can have an impact, right? So yeah, it's always good to understand how people who've experienced different cultures have maybe come across that. Cool. Anything else to add on kind of your general thoughts on the gendered feedback, fighting for unbiased feedback, and maybe any last points of advice that you'd give to your younger self or anyone, kind of starting out onto that trajectory to leadership?
Yeah, I've definitely questioned a lot of the feedback I've received. If I don't receive feedback, I usually solicit it myself. I try to get written feedback. Really, really important to get written feedback in my view. And with the rise of Chat GPT and so many performance reviews being written by AI as well, I think we need to really, really be critical of feedback we receive. Hopefully, in some ways it'll help, right? But of course we know that AI is biased, but I hope that managers continue to do their due diligence. There's definitely potential for a lot of harm for women with AI. So I think let's continue to foster community, talk to each other, celebrate oneself, and have a critical eye to feedback. All feedback, not all feedback is valid. So, I think those are some things I would tell people now and wish someone had told me before.
Amazing. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Nikita. I think what you've gone through today is super powerful, and I'm sure people will be excited to listen to that. So very last question that I like to ask everyone, in terms of your bucket list, where is the next vacation spot?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. I'm always in planning mode. I am gonna say that I've been wanting to go to Iceland for a long time. I feel the landscape there seems beautiful. I love just nature and the water, some whale watching. So I would love to plan a trip there. So I'm gonna go with that.
Oh, amazing. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Nikita. It's been fantastic to talk to you today. Really enjoyed our conversation. Looking forward to keeping connected. And for everyone who is listening, we will link the blog posts and Nikita's LinkedIn if you'd like to connect directly and go from there. Thanks, Nikita.
Thank you so much, Becky.